My name is Eleanor Halsten. I'm 43 years old, and I never expected to stand in full uniform outside a military gala, realizing I wasn't on the guest list. I gave my name to the young officer at the door. He scanned the list once, then again. He frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't listed for tonight's event." I glanced over at my father, Colonel Luther Halsten. He stood nearby holding a glass of something aged and expensive, laughing with a group of retired officers. My mother, Diana, elegant as ever in navy blue, leaned into his shoulder. Neither looked at me. "Did you really think this was for you?" she said quietly when I approached. "This is Dean's night. Don't make it about you." I looked her in the eye. Understood. Then I walked back to my car. No tears. Not then. But that wasn't the moment I broke. That moment happened long before, when I was still a kid, still believing I had a place in that family. I grew up in a town just outside Annapolis, Maryland. It was all red brick and iron fences and American flags in front yards. Military pride wasn't just a tradition, it was a way of life. Our neighbors flew service banners in their windows. Our school paused morning announcements for pledges and prayers. In the Halsten house, things were strict, predictable. Dinner at 1800 hours sharp. Beds made tight enough to bounce a quarter. Silence during the evening news, especially when it involved the force. My father, Colonel Halsten, served with the Navy for 3 decades. He wore his legacy like armor, spoke in measured tones, believed discipline could solve most things. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, it echoed. Dean was born 5 years after me. Blonde hair, sharp jaw, steady hands. From the moment he could walk in a straight line, my father saw a mirror, a successor. Even his name, Dean, came from one of Dad's former commanders. Me, I was just Eleanor. Or Ellie, if my mother felt soft enough that day. I wasn't rebellious. Not really. I followed rules, got good grades. I even saluted properly when my father taught us how. But I was always drawn to circuits and wires, not rifles. My first real joy came from fixing an old microwave someone had left by the curb. I was 12. I stayed up until 2 a.m., taking it apart and putting it back together. When it turned on and the numbers glowed green across the panel, I felt like I had lit up the whole world. I remember bringing it into the kitchen the next morning, proud, hoping my dad would notice. He barely looked up from his paper. Electronics. That's a hobby, not a profession, especially not for a girl. I didn't say anything, just stood there holding something I had brought back to life. I glanced at my mother, but she was busy wiping crumbs off the counter. Dean walked in a moment later, still in pajamas, and my dad beamed. "Morning, champ. I was thinking when you turn 15, we'll get you into a pre-boot camp program. You'll love it." That was the first time I truly felt invisible. Not angry, just erased. But I didn't argue. I just nodded, took the microwave, and placed it back in the garage where it came from. That's the thing about growing up in a house where recognition feels like oxygen. You learn how to breathe quietly so no one notices when you're suffocating. I started fixing other things. Radios, clocks, game consoles, whatever I could find. I stayed up late with textbooks and forums learning about code and encryption before I even had my learner's permit. No one asked what I was doing. No one cared enough to tell me to stop. So I kept going. Until the day I applied to the Naval Cyber Defense Academy without telling a soul. Sunday dinners at the Halsten house were never optional. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans lined up like soldiers on every plate. The table was set with the same china we only used for guests. But that night it was just the 4 of us, Dad at the head, Mom at his right, Dean across from me. I was 17. It started like it always did. Dad asked about school. Dean went first. He talked about his ROTC program and the extra credit he'd gotten in history for his paper on the Battle of Midway. Mom lit up. "See now, that's real education," she said, pouring him more iced tea. "Something that actually matters." I waited for my turn. When it came, I mentioned a project I'd started for the science fair. I was building a radio frequency jammer from scrap electronics. Dad lowered his fork. What a jammer. It blocks signals temporarily. It's just for demonstration, nothing dangerous." Dean snorted into his water. Dad leaned back in his chair. "Why would you waste your time on that kind of thing? It's not a waste. It's like learning another language. I want to study cybersecurity." Mom gave me a tight-lipped smile. Honey, that sounds complicated. It is, I said quietly. That's the point. Dad cut into his beef slowly. You know there are things girls are naturally better at. You've always been good at writing. Maybe focus on something with communication or education. Dean chimed in. Yeah, maybe teach kids how to make toasters explode. They laughed. I didn't. I pushed a green bean across my plate and kept my face neutral. That was the rule, don't show too much. Not pride, not hurt, especially not defiance. But inside, I was burning. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. It wouldn't be the last. What made this time different was what happened after dinner. I went back to the garage where I kept my tools and projects. It was the only space in the house that felt like mine. Old computer parts, soldering irons, shelves, stacked with manuals and printouts. I had a milk crate full of half-finished boards and spare cables. That night, I stared at the tiny pieces I'd carefully collected, each one representing hours of chores, allowances saved, and thrift store finds. I was halfway through adjusting a capacitor when I heard the door open behind me. It was Dad. He didn't come in, just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. You know, Ellie, he said, these little toys are cute, but they're not going to build a future. At some point, you need to think realistically. I said, not looking up. He sighed. I don't want you wasting your potential. You're smart. Use that where it counts. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask who decided what counted, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, Okay, Dad. He left. I stayed there for hours. The next morning, I skipped my usual bus stop and walked an extra 4 blocks to mail my application to the Naval Cyber Defense Academy. I used my own savings to cover the postage. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom, not Dean, especially not Dad. And when the acceptance letter arrived 3 months later, I hid it behind the back panel of my desk drawer. Because in the Halsten family, some victories were better kept private, some dreams had to be protected like secrets, and some truths didn't need permission to exist, so I built my own future, one wire, one bite, one silent rebellion at a time. I waited until the house was asleep. It was almost 2 a.m, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I pulled out the packet I'd hidden under my mattress, my completed application to the Naval Cyber Defense Academy. Every page was crisp, straightened, triple-checked. My hands shook as I slid it into the envelope. Not because I was nervous about getting in. I had the grades, the test scores, the recommendation from my physics teacher, Mr. Jennings, who'd pulled me aside after class one day and said, You think like an engineer, Ellie? Don't waste it? No. What made my hands tremble was what it meant to send it, without permission, without approval, without anyone's blessing. I sealed the envelope, tucked it into my backpack, and tiptoed down the stairs. At the end of our street, under a flickering street lamp, I dropped it into the blue mailbox. It felt like betrayal, like freedom. 2 months later, I got the letter. Thick. Official. My name in block letters on the front. I opened it in my bedroom alone. I didn't scream or dance. I just held the paper in my lap, staring at the words, Congratulations. I stayed quiet, until I couldn't anymore. At dinner that night, I mentioned it. Just a sentence. A thread of a sentence. I got into the Naval Cyber Defense Academy. The room fell still. Dean looked up from his plate, smirking. Wait, for real? That's not a joke. Dad slowly set down his knife. Mom stopped pouring iced tea. You applied? Dad asked. Yes. Without telling us, I didn't think I needed permission. Dad's lips tightened. He glanced at Mom, then back at me. That's a big step, Eleanor, and frankly unrealistic. It's a hard life. You think you can handle military training, I do? You're not cut out for that path. It's not who you are. That hurt more than I let show. Dean added. It's kind of cute, though. Ellie in camo boots trying to carry a rifle. They laughed. Again. I didn't. I finished my meal in silence, cleared my plate, and went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the acceptance letter again, now creased at the corners. I thought of shredding it, hiding it forever. But instead, I folded it neatly, slid it into a folder, and placed it in my suitcase. I'd already made up my mind. Sometimes you don't wait for doors to open. You pick the lock, walk through, and close it behind you. The first week at the academy nearly broke me. I had trained. I had run laps in my neighborhood park, done push-ups behind the garage, memorized military protocols from borrowed handbooks. But nothing prepared me for the cold before dawn, the screaming cadence of drills, or the silence that followed when I walked into a room full of boys who looked at me like I didn't belong. They didn't say it out loud, at least not at first, but you could hear it in the chuckles when I dropped my gear, see it in the way they rolled their eyes when I spoke in class, feel it in the extra second they took before passing me the ball during drills. I tried to stay invisible. It didn't work. One morning we were doing rope climbs in the rain. Mud turned the field into a slip hazard, but the instructors didn't care. "The enemy doesn't wait for good weather," they shouted. I was halfway up the rope when my right foot slipped. I reached out with my left hand too quickly, lost grip, and fell. I landed hard on my left wrist. The pain shot up like a lightning bolt. The medic on duty wrapped it, told me it wasn't broken, just strained. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just don't baby it." The next day I showed up for drills anyway. The sergeant looked at my taped wrist and narrowed his eyes. "You here to work or to win sympathy?" I said nothing, just stepped into line. Later that night I sat alone in the infirmary, flexing my fingers, trying not to cry. Not from the pain, though it throbbed, but from the weight of being doubted over and over. I remembered Dean's voice in my head, laughing. I remembered my father's tone, flat and certain. "You're not cut out for that path." Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here. The door creaked open. Major Leona Bristow stepped inside. She was one of the few women in command, tall, composed, with a presence that made you sit straighter without thinking. She glanced at my wrist, then at my face. "Pain's part of the process," she said. "But doubt? That's the real killer." I nodded, unsure of what to say. She sat across from me. "You've got more to prove than most. That's not fair. But it's real. The sooner you stop looking for permission, the stronger you'll get." I swallowed hard. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I just don't want to quit." She smiled. Not warm, but honest. "Good. Then don't." That night I didn't sleep much. But I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to outshine anyone. I was going to outlast them. I didn't expect Major Bristow to remember me. I figured she said what she said in the infirmary out of duty or habit. People in leadership sometimes dropped words like that, sharp, strong phrases meant to land like inspiration. Most of the time they didn't stick. But a few days later, as I was walking through the quad with a wrapped wrist and a chip on my shoulder, I heard her voice behind me. "Halsten." I turned. She didn't smile. "You're on limited physical rotation, right?" I nodded. "Good. That means your evenings are free." I blinked. "Yes, ma'am. There's a backlog in systems testing for the comms lab. You'll report to Lieutenant Morse at 1900 sharp, every night until you're cleared for full activity." I wasn't sure if it was a punishment or an opportunity. But when Major Bristow handed me a slip of paper with the lab code, her eyes lingered a second longer than they needed to. "You want to be in cyber defense," she said. "Start acting like it." Then she walked off. That night, I showed up early. The lab was dimly lit, scattered with half-disassembled terminals and blinking consoles that looked like they hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. Lieutenant Morse didn't say much, just gave me a pile of reports, a circuit testing kit, and an open terminal. I got to work. For the first time since arriving at the academy, I felt calm. Nobody was watching me. Nobody was laughing. There was no whistle to chase, no mud in my boots, no scoreboard. Just wires, data, signals, truths you couldn't argue with. I started showing up every night. Sometimes Morse was there, sometimes not. A few evenings later, Major Bristow came in. She didn't hover. She just stood at the back of the room and watched. After 2 weeks, I passed my physical retest. I didn't go back to the drills. I stayed in the lab. And I got better. My wrist healed slowly, but my mind sharpened fast. I rebuilt old decryption exercises and ran simulated breach scenarios for fun. Morse handed me tougher challenges. One night he muttered, "You solve problems like a machine," and I took it as the highest compliment I'd ever received. One Friday, as I was shutting down the system, I noticed Major Bristow at the door again. She nodded at the monitors. "Lieutenant Morse says you cracked the signal drift pattern in half the expected time." I didn't mean to, it just made sense. Most things do if you're quiet long enough to listen. I looked at her then. "Why me?" I asked. "There are other cadets. Smarter. Stronger." She crossed her arms. "You think I picked you? Didn't you?" She shook her head. "You picked yourself. I just paid attention." For some reason, that hit harder than any insult ever had. In a house like mine, attention was currency. Love was conditional. Recognition was a myth. And here was this woman, this sharp, unsentimental, utterly competent woman, telling me she saw me. Not because I asked her to, not because I performed, but because I was worth noticing. That night when I got back to the dorms, I pulled out the letter from my dad again, the one he wrote after I got accepted. Just 4 lines. "Proud of you. Hope it works out. Stay safe. Don't expect too much." I folded it up, placed it in my drawer, and closed it softly, because maybe I didn't need more than that anymore. Maybe the acknowledgement I'd been starving for had never been theirs to give. Maybe it was mine to earn from the world on my terms. Graduation day came in the dead heat of July. The campus quad was packed with cadets in polished boots and crisp dress whites. Parents swarmed the bleachers waving miniature flags, holding flower bouquets, some already tearing up before the ceremony even began. I stood in formation 3rd row from the front, 5th in class ranking, one of only 3 women in the top 10. They called my name. Cadet Eleanor Halsten. I stepped forward, accepted the certificate, and shook the commandant's hand. There was applause, standard polite professional. I turned and looked into the crowd, scanning the rows quickly. Nothing. Not even a silhouette I might recognize. No familiar hands, no proud smiles, no camera phone angled just for me. I had sent the invitation weeks ago. No one came. Later, when I checked my phone, there was a message from my mother. "Sorry, Ellie. Dean had his officer candidacy interview today and we didn't want to miss it. You understand, right? Big day for him." I stared at the screen until it dimmed out. I didn't reply. That night, while others went out for drinks or dinner with their families, I sat alone in my room and packed my duffel. No tears, just silence. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped expecting celebration. I had learned to prepare for absence the way others prepared for weather. 2 weeks later, I reported for duty at the Naval Cyber Defense Command. It was nothing like the recruitment brochures. No sleek control rooms or futuristic gadgetry, just rows of aging servers, blinking lights, and a constant hum in the walls like the system was breathing around us. I was assigned to the threat analysis unit. Most of the team didn't know what to make of me, quiet, meticulous female. But I showed up early, read everything, fixed what others overlooked. I spoke only when necessary. My commanding officer, Commander Beck, once called me surgically precise. I didn't need compliments. I needed problems. And in that place, there were plenty. The first major incident came 4 months in. A breach. Real time. Someone was probing the East Coast port system looking for back doors. Alarms. Scrambling. I located the entry point in 11 minutes. Shut it down in 4. Afterward, when the debrief was done and the adrenaline wore off, I stood outside the server room and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. No medals, no parades. But I slept well that night, because in that moment I knew I had done something that mattered. And for once, it didn't need anyone else's permission to matter. The invitation came in the mail, not even addressed in my mother's handwriting. Just a printed card tucked inside a store-bought envelope. "You are cordially invited to attend the ceremony honoring Lieutenant Dean Halsten for receiving the Navy Cross for exceptional valor." There was a note scribbled on the back in blue ink. "Hope you can make it. Mom." That was it. No, we'd love to see you. No, you must come. Just a hope. Passive. Optional. Still I went. Not because I expected anything to change, but because somewhere buried deep beneath layers of scar tissue, there was still that child in me who thought maybe this time, they'd see me. The hall was grand, polished floors, glass chandeliers, a projection screen playing Dean's training footage on loop. Tables with white linens and navy napkins filled the room, marked with place cards bearing names I didn't recognize. I found mine at a table in the back near the bar. I sat down alone. People began to trickle in. Dean's old friends, officers in dress uniform, neighbors from back home, everyone smiling, shaking hands, clapping shoulders. My parents arrived like royalty. My mother wore a pearl set I hadn't seen before. My father moved with the kind of energy he only reserved for public spaces, chest-out handshake, firm laughter, just loud enough. They didn't look at me. Dean entered last. There was a hush, then applause. He looked every bit the part, decorated, confident, charming. He walked straight to our parents, hugged them both. Someone handed him a glass of champagne. My mother wiped a tear. I waited for a glance, a nod, anything. It never came. I stayed in my chair, folded my napkin in my lap, and watched the screen as Dean's name appeared under a dramatic montage of aerial footage and tactical maneuvers. They played a recording of his radio call from the field. There were cheers. Then came the speeches. My father spoke first. He told stories of Dean as a boy, how he always stood up straight, how he memorized Navy code at 11, how he once stopped a neighbor's dog from chasing a toddler, and was called a born protector. I didn't expect to be mentioned, and I wasn't. Eventually, someone brought me a glass of water unprompted. I sipped it slowly, keeping my hands busy. From my seat in the back, I could see it all. My father's pride, my mother's tears, Dean's practiced smile. And in that moment, I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was just tired. Tired of waiting for something to shift. Tired of hoping that being better, working harder, showing up quietly and consistently might finally mean being seen. After a long string of congratulations, laughter, and polite rounds of applause, the final speaker stepped up to the podium. General Marcus Lyman. The name alone carried weight in the room. Decorated, revered, and recently retired after 4 decades of service. He was known as a man who chose his words like ammunition, rarely but precisely. Dean looked starstruck as Lyman approached, his name already glowing on the projection screen behind him. There were whispers among the officers at the front. Dean leaned slightly forward, grinning. My parents did the same. General Lyman adjusted the microphone. It's an honor to stand here today to celebrate Lieutenant Dean Halsten for his remarkable achievement, he began. His service, courage, and commitment reflect the very best of what the Navy instills. Scattered applause followed. Lyman continued, "But if I may ask for your attention a little longer," he said, "I'd like to share a story." The room quieted. 4 months ago, our naval infrastructure was nearly compromised, he said. A cyber threat of unprecedented sophistication targeted our East Coast port systems. What was at stake wasn't just software or data. We were talking about lives, civilian shipments, military cargo, vital medical transport routes. I sat still, my glass of water half raised, a strange tightening in my chest. We had a breach, he said, voice even. One that moved fast, buried deep, and was designed to evade every protocol we had in place. People leaned in now. This wasn't part of the scheduled program. Most of our team scrambled, some froze. But one officer located the breach within 11 minutes, shut it down in under 4. There was a hush. Lyman paused. "I'm not here to dramatize," he said. "I'm here to give credit where it's long overdue." He looked directly toward the back of the room, toward me. Commander Eleanor Halsten. The name hit the air like a dropped glass. Several heads turned. My parents whipped around. Dean froze mid-sip. I didn't move. General Lyman nodded again more deliberately. Commander Halsten's actions that night prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure of national infrastructure. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't expect applause. She simply did her job quietly, thoroughly, and with brilliance. The silence shifted, not tense, not awkward, just stunned. She is a leader, a strategist, and a specialist of the highest caliber, Lyman continued, and she deserves to be known. My father's face had gone pale. My mother looked confused, as if trying to compute the words but unable to plug them into her internal map of who I was. Dean set his glass down slowly. I stayed seated. General Lyman didn't ask me to stand. He didn't need to. His words had already lifted me higher than any podium could. He closed his speech with a final note. In every family, in every unit, there are those whose contributions shine quietly, often unseen, often unacknowledged. But let us not confuse silence with insignificance. Applause began hesitant at first, then growing. I didn't look at anyone. I kept my eyes on the general. For a moment he looked back at me and gave the slightest nod, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, for me. The applause ended. People returned to their wine and conversations, though the air felt different now. The energy had shifted. A few guests glanced back at me with new eyes. One of Dean's colleagues murmured something and looked away quickly. I sat still quiet, still calm. But inside me, something had changed. For years I had existed on the outskirts, working in the dark, excelling in silence, collecting accomplishments like pennies in a jar no one bothered to open. And now, without warning, someone had shattered that jar and poured it out under a spotlight. I didn't need it, but it still meant something. Not because I craved recognition, but because for once the truth refused to stay buried. After General Lyman stepped down, the room shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but you could feel it. Conversations stalled, napkins were adjusted, champagne glasses lowered. People weren't quite sure what to say or where to look. My parents still hadn't moved. My father sat stiffly in his seat, jaw clenched. One hand rested on the table, the other gripped his knee so tightly the knuckles had gone white. My mother's eyes were fixed on the podium, though no one was standing there anymore. Her lips were parted as if trying to form a sentence that hadn't yet arrived. Dean was frozen. He glanced back once, meeting my eyes. I didn't blink, didn't smile. I just sat there, completely still, letting the silence between us say everything I didn't need to. Eventually, the program resumed. There was a cake, a few awkward toasts. Someone handed Dean another award plaque and clapped him on the shoulder. But the air had changed, and the people who mattered knew it. After the crowd began to thin out, I stood up and quietly made my way toward the exit. I didn't plan to say goodbye. I didn't expect anyone to stop me, but someone did. Eleanor. My father's voice, not loud, not harsh, just unfamiliar. I turned. He stood a few feet away from me, his posture still upright, still trained, but softer than I'd ever seen it. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly. "I did. You just didn't hear me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mom joined him a second later. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, but her face had lost all ceremony. "We didn't know," she said, almost breathless. "Your position, the work you do." Her voice trailed off. I didn't help her fill in the blanks. My father cleared his throat. "That General Lyman, he spoke highly of you." "Yes," I said simply. He nodded slowly, like that fact had lodged somewhere uncomfortable in his chest. "I always thought you didn't want this world. The uniform, the burden." I looked at him then, really looked. For the first time I saw not the officer who had dominated my childhood, but a man who didn't know what to do with a daughter he couldn't control. "I never wanted to be like Dean," I said. "But that doesn't mean I wasn't built for service." My mother reached for my hand. I let her take it just for a moment. Her grip was light, tentative. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't say, 'It's okay,' because it wasn't. I didn't say I forgive you, because I hadn't decided yet." I simply nodded. "I didn't come here to prove anything," I said quietly. "I came because I wanted to witness who you all chose to celebrate." My father looked away. Dean approached then. His smile was gone, his steps slower than usual. "I didn't know you were—" doing all that he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know. You should have said something." I raised an eyebrow. "Would it have made a difference?" He didn't answer, and that was answer enough. I turned toward the exit. My mother called after me. "Will we see you again?" I paused at the door hand resting on the handle. "I don't know." Because I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I had no interest in squeezing myself into a space that had always been too small. No urge to ask for a seat at a table that was never set with me in mind. There was a strange kind of peace in that. The peace that comes when you finally stop trying to be seen by people who choose blindness. The peace of knowing your worth isn't a vote they get to cast. So I walked out. Not in anger, not in sorrow, just in truth. It was late when I finally left the reception hall. The parking lot had mostly cleared out. The air had cooled. My heels clicked softly on the pavement as I made my way to the far corner where I had parked away from the crowd habit maybe. Or instinct. I had just opened the driver's side door when I heard his voice again. Ellie. I turned slowly. My father stood a few steps behind me. No medals. No crowd. Just a tired man in a suit that suddenly looked a size too big. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked down at the ground, then up at me. I owe you an apology, he said. I said nothing. He cleared his throat. I didn't know what you'd become. I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't think. He trailed off. I waited. You were always smart, he said, eyes squinting against the parking lot lights. But I didn't think you'd go that far. I still didn't speak. It wasn't out of spite. It was because I had nothing left to give to the conversation he thought he was starting. You didn't come to us for help, he continued. You just did it. All of it. On your own. I nodded, slowly. He hesitated as if unsure whether he was supposed to keep talking or walk away. I don't know how I missed it, he said, almost to himself. You didn't miss it, I finally said. He blinked. You ignored it. He looked as if I'd slapped him. Not physically, but something in his face gave way like a structure cracking beneath years of weight. I could have said more. I could have reminded him of the science fair he never attended, of the dinner conversations, where he shut me down, of the way he praised Dean for breathing, but questioned every step I took. But I didn't. Because none of that mattered now. This moment wasn't about dragging the past into the light. It was about standing in it finally with nothing left to hide. You did good, kid, he said after a long pause. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't enough, but it was something. I gave him a single nod. He started to turn, then hesitated again. You ever need anything, he said. Anything at all? I tilted my head. I've needed a lot of things, I said quietly, most of which I figured out how to live without. He didn't argue. He just nodded and walked away. I stood there for a moment, watching him shrink into the dark, his shoulders less square than I remembered. Then I got into my car. No tears, just breath, just space. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was clean, like something heavy had finally been set down after being carried too long. Maybe some people wait their whole lives for that kind of apology. Maybe they write speeches in their heads, imagine breakdowns, rebuildings, hugs that fix everything. But sometimes the apology isn't what changes you. Sometimes it's realizing you no longer need it. I returned to base the next morning before sunrise. The sky was still navy blue, streaked with the first hints of light. The guard at the gate gave me a small nod and waved me through. No salutes, no fanfare, just familiarity. My building was quiet. The halls smelled faintly of machine oil and burnt coffee. My boots echoed softly on the tile as I walked toward my office, unlocking the door with the same rhythm I always had. Nothing had changed. My desk was still cluttered with reports and cables. A half-finished analysis waited on my screen. There was a sticky note in my own handwriting reminding me to patch the latest security framework. I hung up my coat, sat down, and exhaled. I didn't feel hollow, or overwhelmed, or even reflective, really. What I felt was solid, like I had come back not just to the base but to myself. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after you stop chasing people's approval. It's not loud or triumphant. It's quiet, a stillness that settles deep in your bones where the noise of doubt used to live. I opened my terminal. The cursor blinked patiently, waiting for me, and I began. I reviewed logs, flagged anomalies, sent notes to my team. Hours passed. At one point, someone knocked gently and left a sealed report at my door. I didn't even look up until the sun had fully risen. No one asked how the event had gone. No one asked if my name had been said aloud by a general in front of 100 strangers. And I didn't offer. That part of the story belonged to me, not because I wanted to protect it, but because for once I didn't need anyone else to validate it. Around noon, I stepped outside and walked the perimeter path behind the main server building. It curved along a narrow strip of trees, quiet, and often overlooked. I liked it for that reason. As I walked, I let the past night settle into me, not like a weight, but like a memory I didn't need to sort anymore. It could just live where it lived. I didn't have to retell it, or defend it, or mourn it. I thought of my father's face when he realized he didn't know me, of my mother's hand, unsure whether to reach for mine, of Dean, speechless for once, and I thought of that moment in the gala when my name was spoken with clarity, with truth, with power. It mattered, but it didn't define me. That was the real shift, because I had spent so many years building a version of myself that might finally get seen, get clapped for, get claimed. And now that it had happened, now that the spotlight had grazed me, I didn't feel filled up. I felt released from the pressure to be extraordinary, just to be enough. Released from the burden of trying to impress people who refused to be impressed. Released from the hunger to be invited to tables I'd always had to pull up a chair to on my own. I was tired of earning what should have been freely given, so I stopped trying. I wasn't bitter, just done. Done pretending my silence was strength when it was really just survival. Done pretending I didn't care, and done asking to be seen. Now, I saw myself, and that was more than enough. I stood at the edge of the path and looked out past the fence line where the horizon touched the sky like a closed circuit. There was wind in the trees, a quiet hum from the satellite dish above the main building. The sun was warm but not heavy. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I just felt present, and that, in its own quiet way, was power. The folder was standard issue, thick cardstock, navy blue, government seal embossed on the front. Nothing unusual. I received 2 or 3 like it each week, new personnel assignments, updates on clearances, transfer records. I didn't open it right away. It sat on the corner of my desk while I finished compiling a breach report. My coffee had gone cold, but I kept sipping it out of habit. Outside the window, a soft rain tapped against the glass in rhythmic, even beats. A good day to be indoors, a good day to get things done. When I finally flipped open the folder, I barely registered the name at first. Then I saw it printed in all caps near the top of the first page. Halsten Dean R. Rank. LTJG clearance, active transfer request approved. Cyber Operations Unit, CMDR. E. Halsten, immediate supervisor. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I was shocked, but because the irony was so sharp it didn't cut. It just hummed. I read the rest of the packet slowly. Deployment history, training notes, skills assessment. Nothing stood out as problematic. He had decent marks. A commendation or two, no disciplinary flags, and now he was being assigned to my team. Not temporarily, not as a visiting consultant, as one of mine. I closed the folder gently, smoothed the cover with my palm, sat back in my chair. For a brief second, I imagined what it would feel like to walk into my parents' house and hand them that document. No speeches, no explanations, just let them read it in silence the way I had read Dean's name so many times growing up on trophies, on certificates, in announcements pinned to the refrigerator door. But that fantasy passed as quickly as it came. I didn't need them to read it. I already knew what it meant. Dean was no longer the story they told with pride. Now he was a line item on my ledger. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same brother who used to laugh at the idea of me in uniform, who once told me I looked ridiculous holding a drill, would now sit across from me in mission briefings, and I wouldn't have to say a word. Because some shifts don't require confrontation, some just require a signature and a title. I sent a brief acknowledgement to HR confirming receipt of the transfer. Then I got back to work. That evening, I stayed late in the lab running simulations with one of my junior analysts. He didn't know the name Halsten. To him, I was just Commander H, quiet, precise, meticulous. I liked that. After he left, I stood for a long time at the main board watching the systems cycle. There was comfort in its logic. in the way data moved without ego, without history, no favoritism, no projection, just clean information flowing exactly as it was built to. Tomorrow, Dean would walk through those doors and report for duty. He'd be in standard-issue fatigues, clipboard in hand, waiting for instructions. And I would give them, professionally, briefly, without ceremony, because power doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like control so complete it doesn't need to announce itself. If you've ever worked your way to the top of a place that once tried to keep you small, this moment is yours. Not because you wanted revenge, but because you outgrew the need for it. Dean arrived on a Wednesday. The front desk buzzed just before 0800. My assistant stuck her head in the door. "There's a Lieutenant Halsten here to report for assignment." I didn't flinch. "Send him in." A moment later, Dean stepped through the doorway. He looked the same and didn't. Still had that clean, squared-off jawline, still stood like someone used to being the center of a room. But there was something tight around his eyes, like he hadn't slept well. Or maybe like he was bracing for something and didn't know why. He stopped just inside the door when he saw me behind the desk. His eyebrows twitched. "Ellie," he said, like he wasn't sure if that was still what he was supposed to call me. I didn't stand. "Lieutenant," I said evenly. "You're on time. That's a good start." He blinked. A beat of silence stretched between us, then he stepped forward and placed a folder on my desk. Orders. Paperwork. Standard onboarding. I flipped it open, reviewed the top page without looking up. "Welcome to Cyber Operations Unit 3, I said. "You'll be assigned to system diagnostics for your first rotation. After that, you'll shadow the team leads across 3 primary branches." I could feel his eyes on me as I spoke, trying to track this version of me he hadn't prepared for. "I didn't realize you—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I didn't realize this was your unit." I looked at him then. My voice was steady. Most people don't. He swallowed and nodded once, but he didn't sit. His hand hovered awkwardly at his side like he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Listen," he said, quieter now. "About the other night at the gala, I didn't know." "You didn't need to," I replied. "It wasn't about you. That landed harder than I intended, but I didn't walk it back." He glanced at the wall behind me, then back at my desk, like he was trying to gather his footing in unfamiliar territory. "You always kept things to yourself," he said. "I thought you just didn't want to share." "I stopped sharing," I said, when it became clear no one was listening. His face tightened, but he didn't argue. He stood a little straighter, then reverting to military reflex. "What are your expectations for me here?" I appreciated the pivot. "Professional. Clear. You'll be treated like any other officer under my command," I said. "You'll be evaluated based on performance. No more, no less." He nodded. "Understood." I handed him back the folder. "Your clearance badge will be waiting at the front desk in 10 minutes. Report to Sergeant Malik in diagnostics by 0900. He'll show you around." Dean took the folder. Still hesitated. "I didn't come here to cause problems," he said. "Or step into anything weird." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "You're not the one stepping into something." "I've been here a while." His jaw twitched. Another silence settled between us, this one thicker, heavier. Then he gave a short nod and turned to go. I watched him walk out. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing in his shadow. I didn't feel like I had to explain myself or protect my space. He was in my world now, and I hadn't built it for applause. The briefing room was packed by 0900. 12 officers, 4 department leads, 2 analysts, and 1 commander. Me. I stood at the front of the room in full uniform, the projector casting a live threat matrix behind me, IP addresses, timestamps, red flag alerts pulsing across a map of the eastern seaboard. The team was quiet, focused. This was a high-priority debrief, and everyone knew it. Dean sat 3 rows back, second seat from the aisle. He didn't speak. I didn't look at him. "Last night's firewall breach at Portbridge was a decoy," I said, my voice even clipped. "The real breach vector was routed through a civilian logistics database 3 counties inland. It's been dormant for 3 months. We just didn't see it because we were looking too close." A few murmurs, nods. The head of systems security scribbled something in his notebook. I clicked through to the next slide. "This is the pattern replication the AI flagged. It wasn't a brute force attack. It was a mimic sequence. Someone studied our architecture and then built their way in with near-perfect behavioral imitation. Silence. Dean shifted in his seat, not fidgeting but alert. "Sergeant Malik," I said, "prepare the counter-simulation patch. I want diagnostics stress-tested in both legacy and current hybrid systems." "Yes, Commander. Lieutenant Halsten, you'll assist in port rotation analysis and signal echo mapping." There was the smallest pause in the room. Dean nodded once. "Understood." I moved on. I didn't slow down. I didn't soften. I didn't offer context for who he was or why he was suddenly in the room, because here rank spoke louder than family. By the end of the meeting, tasks were delegated, deadlines established, people began to file out with purpose and direction. Dean lingered, standing quietly near the exit. He waited until the room was nearly empty. "You were good," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You thought I wouldn't be?" He shook his head. "I just didn't expect that." I didn't respond. He looked at the table where I had placed my notes, at the layout, the order, the efficiency. "This is your world," he said. "Yes." He ran a hand over the back of his neck. "You don't have to worry. I won't make it harder. I'm not worried." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I guess you're not." And with that, he left. Later that week, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Dean told us. He's working under you. He didn't say much, but we were surprised. Not in a bad way, just surprised." Pause. "You've built quite a reputation. I guess we never really asked what you were doing over there." Another pause. "Your father. He doesn't know what to say, but he keeps reading about cybersecurity now, keeps asking questions." I deleted the message without saving it. Not out of anger, but because the words weren't for me. They were for their guilt. I didn't need it. At the end of that week, our unit received commendation from Central Command for the Port Bridge maneuver. No parade, no interviews, just a quiet memo. Signed at the top, CMDR, E. Halsten. It was posted on the main board in the hallway alongside a list of those who assisted, including LTJG Dean Halsten. I passed by it that afternoon. A junior officer was standing in front of it reading the names. He looked up when I walked by. "Ma'am," he said, nodding. I nodded back and kept walking. Because I didn't need to stop, didn't need to point, didn't need to explain. Power, real power, doesn't raise its voice. It just stands still while everyone else scrambles to understand what changed. The following Monday, Dean requested a one-on-one meeting. He didn't schedule it formally, just knocked on my office door between briefings holding a report in his hand like it was a shield. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, closed the door. He sat across from me, posture straight, but eyes uncertain. The report stayed untouched on his lap. "This isn't about work," he said. "Not directly." I waited. "I've been trying to process everything," he continued. "Us, the last few weeks, the way things flipped." I didn't say anything. "I didn't know what you did," he said. "Not really. I thought you sat in a room with computers. I didn't understand the scale. Still, I said nothing. You never said anything growing up. You never fought back. Never told Mom and Dad how things really were." Now I leaned back. "I did," I said quietly. "Plenty of times. You just weren't listening. None of you were." He lowered his gaze. "I think I was jealous. That caught me off guard." "Of what? Your focus, your certainty. Even when no one believed in it, you kept going. I always needed Dad's approval like oxygen. You just created your own air." He looked up. "And now I'm working for you." I held his gaze. "You're working with me," I said, "as long as you do the job." He nodded. "I will." Another silence settled in. Then he said, "Do you think Mom and Dad ever really understood what they did? What they didn't do?" I smiled faintly. "I don't think it matters anymore. But don't you want them to say it, to admit they were wrong?" My answer came without hesitation. "No." That seemed to startle him. "I wanted it for a long time," I added. "But not now, because if I have to force someone to see me, then it's not seeing. It's just performance." Dean exhaled, sat still for a moment longer, then stood. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm proud to be in your unit." I didn't say thank you. not out of coldness, but because I didn't need to return sentiment to validate it. He left, closing the door softly behind him. That evening, I walked out of the command center just after dusk. The base was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of sodium lights and the distant buzz of a generator. I passed by a few officers heading in the other direction. Most nodded in acknowledgement. A few saluted. I nodded back but kept walking. Not rushing, not drifting, just walking. For years I used to fill silence with explanations. Why I missed the dinner. Why I chose this path. Why I didn't call more. Why I didn't come home for Thanksgiving. Always answering a question that no one had actually asked with sincerity. But not anymore. That night I called home. Left a voicemail. Don't wait for me this year. I'll be working. And honestly, I don't think we have anything left to circle around. No anger, no sarcasm, just the facts. Because there comes a point when you stop playing emotional chess with people who never even bothered to learn the rules. There was a freedom in that, a stillness. I used to think that power meant taking up space, making noise, being undeniable. But now I know. Real power is the ability to leave a room without explanation, to walk away without needing the last word, to be whole even when no one claps. So I walked across the base under a sky slowly shifting to stars, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not my presence, not my softness, not my story. It started with a drawer, a shallow wooden one in my bedroom, second from the top, always slightly jammed from years of cramming too much into too little space. That Sunday, I pulled it open and just stared. Inside were folded notes, old letters, birthday cards from years I tried to forget, and 2 programs from Dean's early promotion ceremonies, both carefully annotated in my mother's handwriting. Not a single item with my name on it. I wasn't surprised. Still, I picked them up one by one, turning each over in my hands like examining fossils from a life I no longer lived. There was one envelope tucked in the back, yellowed at the edges, my father's handwriting. Ellie. Good luck at the academy. Make us proud if that's really what you want. No return address, no signature, no warmth. I held the letter for a long moment, remembering how hard I had clung to those words back then. Reading them over and over, pretending they meant something they didn't. Pretending if that's really what you want was support and not suspicion. I took everything out of the drawer and carried it to the backyard. The fire pit hadn't been used in months. I struck a match, lit a small flame, and fed it the paper slowly, one letter, one card, one artifact at a time. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd already grieved these absences years ago. I just hadn't cleared the space they left behind. Until now. Some memories don't haunt us because of what happened. They haunt us because of what never did. The words never said, the moments never offered, the pride that never arrived. We hold on because we think maybe one day someone will reach back and rewrite the story for us. But that day rarely comes. The flame crackled as my father's letter curled into ash. The words blackened, folded inward, disappeared. I watched it all disappear and felt lighter. Not euphoric, not victorious, just still. I went back inside and started cleaning the rest of the house. Old uniforms, files I didn't need, books I'd outgrown. There's something about creating space that feels dangerous when you're used to scarcity. But I kept going. Because this time, the emptiness wasn't fear, it was permission. Permission to rebuild on my terms, to keep only what added meaning, to stop decorating the shelves of my life with proof that I had tried to be loved properly. I didn't need the artifacts anymore. The work I did spoke loud enough. My life, quiet, stable mine was the only proof I needed. The envelope came on a Thursday. Unmarked, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, a little slanted, a habit Dean had picked up from one of Dad's old Navy manuals. I stood at the kitchen counter, holding it for a long time before I opened it. It wasn't anger holding me back. It was something quieter, caution maybe, or curiosity. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not typed, handwritten, 4 short paragraphs, no greeting, no sign-off, just words direct and deliberate. He started by saying he was sorry. that he'd spent a long time convincing himself he hadn't done anything wrong, but now saw that silence is its own kind of failure. He said he remembered the microwave I fixed when I was 12, how he laughed, how Dad barely looked at it, how I carried it out of the room like it didn't matter. He said he knew now that it did matter, and that he was sorry for not saying so. He admitted that he resented how easily approval came to him and how little he understood what it meant when it never came to me. He said he respected the woman I'd become, and that if I ever wanted to talk, he'd be there. I read it twice, once with my eyes, and once with my body. Because sometimes you don't realize how much space someone took up in your memory until you finally let their voice echo through it one last time. I sat down at the kitchen table, placed the letter in front of me, smoothed the corners, then I folded it in half, then in quarters, and I tore it. Not violently, just completely. Piece by piece, until the words no longer lived on the page. I dropped the pieces in the trash, washed my hands, and made tea. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need the letter. Not anymore. He needed to write it, and I respected that. But I didn't need to keep it to feel whole, because forgiveness isn't always about dialogue. Sometimes it's about not letting a moment, no matter how sincere, pull you back into a version of yourself you've already grown out of. I had nothing left to prove, and he had nothing left to explain, and that was enough. Closure doesn't always look like a hug. Sometimes it looks like reading something slowly, breathing deeply, and letting it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controls the story. Later that night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light flicker once, then steady itself. The world hadn't changed, but something in me had, not because of the letter, but because of the silence that followed, and how peaceful it finally felt. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up. It was early afternoon on a Saturday. I was sorting cables in the utility room when the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting a delivery or a neighbor with a question about the fence. But there they were. My mother with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, my father standing a little behind her as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. For a moment, no one said anything. Then my mother smiled, small, polite, uneasy. "We didn't want to bother you," she said. "But you came anyway," I replied. She winced, but nodded. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. Not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They sat on the couch just like they used to when I was a teenager getting lectured for not answering the phone or forgetting to clean the kitchen. Except now I stood. My father was the one who finally spoke. "We're in a bit of a bind," he said. "Financially." I waited. There was a medical bill, a few things we didn't plan for. The pension isn't stretching the way it used to. My mother added quickly, "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." I believed her. They looked tired. They looked older than I remembered. But I didn't feel pity, just clarity. "You want my help?" I said. My father nodded. "We know you're doing well. We've seen some of the press. And Dean told us about the commendation." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one you never called to ask me about?" He had the decency to look down. "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "Let's make that clear. We're not offering one." My mother said too quickly, then flinched at her own tone. I let the silence stretch. Then I walked to the desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single-page contract. Standard. Precise. I handed it to my father. "If I help, it's as a professional. This outlines the support, the terms, and the repayment timeline. You'll sign it. No exceptions." He read it in silence. My mother looked at me, searching. "You'd really make us sign something?" After everything, I met her gaze. "Especially after everything." My father took the pen, signed. My mother hesitated, then followed. When they handed the folder back, I placed it neatly in the drawer. "This isn't punishment," I said. "It's policy. I don't give out pieces of myself for free anymore." My mother looked like she might cry. My father looked like he finally understood something he couldn't name. "You've changed," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, I just stopped shrinking." They left not long after. We didn't hug, we didn't make promises, and I didn't watch them drive away. Sometimes boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you finally learn to close and lock from the inside, not to keep people out, but to keep yourself in. The sky was just beginning to shift, soft gray giving way to the first gentle hints of gold. I sat on the back steps of my house, mug of coffee warm between my hands, breath visible in the morning air. It was quiet. No emails, no alarms, no footsteps echoing down sterile corridors, just wind through the trees and the occasional song of a bird testing the edge of day. I used to chase moments like this, grasp at them in between chaos and compliance, hoping they'd give me something that resembled peace. But peace isn't something you steal, it's something you choose. And I had chosen it. There was no one left to impress, no stories left to rewrite, no names I needed to hear from to feel real. I was real. Not because someone handed me a medal, not because my name was finally spoken out loud, but because in the silence I had built something solid, something unshakable, myself. Sometimes the sunrise isn't a new beginning, it's a quiet confirmation that you survived the night you thought would never end. I took another sip, closed my eyes, and let it rise. I used to think family was automatic, that the people who raised you, fed you, clothed you, had some unspoken authority to define who you were allowed to become. I thought love was a reward you earned by being good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, that if I just kept trying, kept showing up, kept achieving eventually, they'd let me in. Eventually I'd be enough to belong. But that version of love, the one tied to performance and silence, that wasn't love, it was compliance, dressed up as care. And family isn't who shares your last name. It's who sees you without asking you to shrink. It's who claps for you when no one's watching. It's who holds your name with gentleness, not power. Over the years, I've met people who became my family in all the ways that matter. A sergeant who always made sure I had a seat at the table. A technician who remembered my birthday when my parents didn't. A supervisor who didn't flinch when I failed and handed me a harder assignment to remind me she believed I'd rise. No one owed me those things. And that's what made them real. Because real love isn't transactional. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't retreat when you stop performing. It holds steady, even when you waver. Especially when you waver. Conditional love says, be who I need you to be, and I'll stay. Unconditional love says, be exactly who you are and I'm not going anywhere. I don't regret loving the wrong way, because it taught me how to love better, how to stop begging for belonging, and how to start building a life that doesn't require permission. So if no one ever told you this before, let me be the first. You don't have to earn the right to be seen. You already have it. And anyone who asks you to trade yourself for their comfort was never your home to begin with. If you're still here, thank you. You've listened to more than just a story. You've walked with me through silence, through doubt, through years of being overlooked and underestimated. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen pieces of yourself along the way. If you have, I want you to hear me now. You are not too late. You are not too quiet. You are not too much or not enough. You are exactly what this world needs when you stop apologizing for existing on your own terms. There is power in walking away from places that never saw you. There is peace in not needing to explain yourself anymore. And there is freedom, real freedom in building a life that feels like home inside your own skin. You don't have to wait for anyone else to name your worth. You already know it. I used to think being invisible was a curse. Now I know it was a chance to become visible to the only person who ever truly mattered. Me. So here's to the quiet ones. The steady ones, the late bloomers, the overlooked, the underestimated. We don't need the spotlight, we become the light. Now go, take your story back, and don't you dare whisper it. Say it like it belongs to you, because it does. It always has.